Here is Chantal Yazbek, and her topic is Kalahari Dystopias and the Utopia of Becoming Bushmen as Ecological Model. Welcome, Chantal.
Thank you, Bettina, for your talk. I really appreciated that. For 200,000 years, humans have hunted and gathered on planet Earth. The loss of this existence in modern times has literally abstracted us from our environment and altered the human psyche in ways that we have yet to grasp or come to terms with. This loss, which occurred in some parts of the world 12,000 years ago, and in others 70 years ago, has occurred fairly rapidly when one considers the broader context of human history from the Paleolithic era until our contemporary moment today. The San Bushmen of Southern Africa are one of the last groupings of hunter-gatherers whose lifestyle and hunting practices have been retained within memorable history. These peoples, also commonly referred to as the First Peoples, are believed to be the physical and psychological forebearers of who we as humans understand ourselves to be. Since the 1950s, change has been both rapid and traumatic for these peoples. The San Bushmen are no longer able to hunt the animals they once did, restricted by roads, country borders, and fences that protect wildlife game parks they once called home. They have inevitably been caught up in the political changes that have taken place in South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, including the political wars of the greed of mineral extraction. Some manage to earn money by making curios for tourists and by performing the medicine dance, or through small agricultural projects set up by NGOs. But, for the most part, they live in multiple forms of social poverty around small villages. Tin shanties have taken the place of traditional dwellings, and firearms are now greatly coveted. The inability of the San Bushmen to engage in the hunt is not simply the loss of a traditional form of physical sustenance. It is rather the loss of a way of being in the world that drastically alters their epistemological and ontological experience of the environment around them. It severs their relationship to the earth and to the Kalahari Desert itself. For the San Bushmen, the hunt is an ecological model towards an integral ecology, the true significance of which is difficult for the Western paradigm to grasp or understand. In the year 2000, South African filmmakers Craig and Damon Foster released the first film to fully document the chasing hunt in San Bushman society, called The Great Dance. The film played like a poetic ode to the utopia that Elizabeth Marshall Thomas and her family encountered in the 1950s living with Jukauzi Bushmen in the Kalahari Desert, an encounter she refers to in her work as living in the old way. Nearly a decade later, when the filmmakers released their second film, called My Hunter's Heart, made upon the request of the Kumani San peoples, it echoed like a self-proclaimed eulogy to a way of life whose people appeared physically and metaphorically trapped between worlds. The death of the old way, which has become the unofficial politics of the San Bushmen, can be seen as a metaphor to the window of the heart of the world. We are all hunter-gatherers just under the skin, says Craig Foster, and we stand as a species at the end of a more than 100,000 years of hunting and gathering, largely taking place unnoticed. What is the significance of the extinction of this era that is taking place? I turn to the San Bushmen to answer this question, because as Craig says, their experience is clearer than ours. And the story of the Bushmen is a microcosm of where we find ourselves as a civilization today. We, on a larger and more global scale, have had our environment destroyed right in front of us, not due to some unknown force, but due to a way of life that we not only took upon ourselves, but forced upon the furthest corners of the world. National politics, agriculture, diamonds, wildlife hunting, and natural gas have all but torn the Kalahari and its inhabitants, with its millions of plant and animal species, apart. An ecosystem that until recently flourished in a co-beneficial environment of cohabitation. This is a way of life, I suggest, that holds the practice of becoming, and more specifically, becoming animal, at the center of attaining an integral ecology. A life where the human is integral to the ecological fabric of the Kalahari web as multiple zones of proximity, begging us to question, what role does becoming animal play in hunter-gatherer societies as it relates to the lived utopia, of their ontological engagement with epistemic space? It is here that we learn that what the San Bushmen have to share with us is relationships themselves, which are built and sustained through ongoing practices of the exegesis of one's environment. This exegesis is enabled through a practice of an ontological way of being that is foreign to the Western understanding of the material world and the human's relationship to materiality. In defining becoming animal, I make use of philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari's definition of becoming animal in 1,000 Plateaus. I quote, "To become is the metaphysical experience of a process through which a zone of proximity made up of effects between entities is found," unquote. This zone of proximity is a literal and metaphysical tool that can provide the lineage of Western thinking about phenomena with an alternate metaphysics to understanding ecological environments as ontologically other epistemic spaces. Anthropologist Matthias Günther defines these ecological environments or zones as three ontological domains of being that exist individuated yet indiscernible and inseparable within San Bushman society, these being the world beyond of mythological beings, the liminal world of ritual, and the world of the here and now. If the metaphysics of the philosophical tradition of the West does not allow for the explanation of a reversal of lived ontological phenomena that underpins, particularly as it pertains to the zone of proximity, the San Bushmen themselves, and that ontology between human and animal, then how are we to take seriously the world of the San Bushmen and their ontological claims of the importance of becoming animal? And how are Deleuze and Guattari trying to provide us with a language to help us think differently? For Professor of Philosophy Robert Sinnebrink, he says that there's this focus on nature, on life, and the way philosophy can enliven and, if you like, open up a different way of relating to the natural world. So relating to the environment as we are part of it, we are a kind of expression of, or a constituent part of a larger whole that we have to understand holistically, dynamically, as a kind of complex system where things are interconnected in complex ways, but at the same time, there's enormous differentiation and individuation, and how to think these two dynamics together. You know, individuation on the one hand and the complex whole on the other. That's dynamic in motion and constantly transforming. In other words, one can read that Deleuze's philosophy, and by extension his philosophical experimentation with Guattari, are aimed at helping us to think beyond the metaphysical rules of our own tradition. Professor of philosophy Alain Bellier sees this philosophical experimentation of becomings as meant to serve as a literal and metaphysical deviation from what would be the majoritarian power that carries with it both philosophical and political value. that is meant to redirect our vision of the world's phenomena towards a minoritarian view, where no privilege is granted to the human. This, according to Alain, promotes an anti-humanistic type of thought. It is the thought within the Western tradition that is more congruent with and perhaps even capable of allowing us to form a bridge to explore the phenomenological zone of proximities that exist within the Kalahari Desert. As Deleuze and Guattari explain, becomings are molecular, which is to say imperceptible and yet perfectly real. For the San Bushman, the hunt where the hunter is willing to become animal is an act of dancing with these molecular elements of their environment. I quote, "You must know the ways of the animal before you eat it. When I was running, I was really kudu. It's a long time since I felt this way." Unquote. For the San Bushman, the dance of the hunt is a process where one takes the essence of the animal into one's own body, soul, and mind. Quote, "Tracking is like dancing because your body is happy. When you are tracking and dancing, you are talking with God." Unquote. For these people, a lived ecological epistemology is an ecology of knowledges that places an altered form of ontology at the center of their engagement with their environment, at the center of what constitutes their past and future utopia. Similarly, for Deleuze and Guattari, the world of becoming is of an order that is different from that of filiation. It is instead the world of contagion, assemblage, multiplicities, the world of the rhizome that interacts on the plane of consistency. Theoretically, there appears to be a lack of academic extension of the theory of becoming to the study of hunter-gatherer ontology, particularly within an African context. Key exceptions to this within an Amazonian context would be Eduardo Viveros de Castro's application of the broader theory of becoming to the ontology of the Araweta in Amazonia, and Eduardo's Cohen's same broad use of the theory in his book, How Forests Think. More recently, becoming animal has been liminally applied by Annette Watson and Orville H. Huntington to the study and practices of the Koyakan Athabascan peoples. I, as they did, found the theory of becoming animal to be in part congruent with indigenous descriptions of the process of merging. Having said this, my application of the theory, much like that of Eduardo Cohen, seeks to move beyond the concept of merging as a broadly applied animistic and shamanic principle of indigenous cultures toward a new understanding of the anthropology and ontology of a particular grouping of hunter-gatherers within unique epistemic space. Watson and Huntington write that the difference between indigenous Western knowledges is born from how their epistemic spaces recognize assemblages through either humanist or post-humanist philosophies. Uruchal, the central character in the film, My Hunter's Heart, demonstrates this when he says that, "I see the dance, the hunt, the seeds of nature. It's all one thing." The San Bushmen recognize these processes of boundary crossing, as political philosopher Louis Herman describes, I quote, as a process whereby things become what they are not, and in so doing paradoxically become more themselves, become more their environment. Anthropologist Matthias Günther refers to this process as ontological flux, an unstable, mutable, and fluid ontology which goes beyond the animistic understanding of relational ontology. The mutability of ontology in San Bushman cosmology and the extension of human-animal continuity and ritual are also extended into the real-world realm of hunting, a practice that allows the San Bushmen to both see and know their environment in a manner that once earned them the title, the first biological scientists on Earth. This knowing was and is critical to our understanding of how to live not of or from, but with our environmental home. In closing, to say that the San Bushmen find themselves today without a culture is to misunderstand the old way. In the philosophy of Deleuze and Guattari, it is to represent the world of the Bushmen arborescently versus rhizomatically. These people have not been stripped of a cultural existence. They have been separated from the world of ontological flux, from the practice of becoming animal, becoming hunter-gatherer, becoming the Kalahari Desert itself. For Urugab, whose nome means hunter, knower of nature, the land itself is full of the old ways of becomings that can remind him of his people and who they are. And as Michael Hutchinson writes in Africa Speaking with Earth and Sky, the San have retained something that most civilized culture have lost. They are an integral component in what the Bushmen call the great dance of life. How does the ontological world of the San Bushmen have practical meaning for us today in the hopes, dreams, and actions of our own utopian becomings within a time of environmental crisis? Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. Last but not